from the heart of rural France. This is the Keto Woman podcast, brought to you by me. Hello Keto lovelies, I'm Daisy Brackenhall, and I've spent most of my life struggling with my weight and confidence, and have always had a difficult relationship with food. Even when I finally got to my target weight, after weight loss surgery and eating low carb, I couldn't maintain it and I was miserable. I've been keto now for over 2 years, and it has given me the freedom to fall in love with food again, without the constant gain, loss, guilt, virtue cycle of before. Health and happiness is where it's at now, running on fat. Welcome to the Keto Woman podcast. Each week I'll be chatting to inspirational women, maybe even the odd man, to discover the secrets to their success so that I can share them with you. So what is keto? Keto is a way of eating that enables you to switch your body's main fuel source from sugar to fat. Who doesn't want to be a fat burner, right? But how do we achieve this? A great place to start is by keeping carbs under 20 grams a day. So things like leafy greens and above ground vegetables, plus some nuts and seeds and the incidental carbs you find in things like full fat dairy. Choose delicious fatty proteins and be free and easy with oily dressings on salad and butter on your veggies. Once you're in the swing of things, you can tweak it to suit you. Make your own personalized keto. You'll hear all sorts of ways to keto from my guests. There is no one way to do keto, no one size fits all. I hope to show you just how flexible and fabulous this way of eating can be. I'm not a doctor, and most of my guests won't be either, so we really can't give you medical advice. It's always best to consult your own doctor when making big changes to your diet and lifestyle, because they know you and your medical history, and so have access to the bigger picture. Wouldn't it be helpful to have one place where you could find all the links? Want to sign up to my new Patreon exclusive Facebook group, Daisy's Lovelies? No problem. How about subscribing to my YouTube channel? Please help me notch up my first 1,000 subscribers by going to links.ketowomanpodcast.com and following the YouTube link. Not following me on Instagram yet? Hit the Instagram button. You get the idea. All the buttons, all the links you need are at links.ketowomanpodcast.com. Thank you for tuning in to episode number 135. This week I'm joined by extraordinary woman Megan Ramos. Megan is a clinical educator and co-founder of the fasting method, along with Dr. Jason Fung. She's an expert on therapeutic fasting and low-carbohydrate diets, having guided more than 14,000 people worldwide. She is the co-author of the New York Times bestseller, Life in the Fasting Lane. Megan was diagnosed with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease at age 12, polycystic ovarian syndrome at age 14, and type 2 diabetes at age 27. She reversed these metabolic conditions and achieved an 86-pound weight loss by incorporating intermittent fasting with a low-carb diet, and is now passionate about helping others do the same. Megan lives in Toronto, Canada. She is a director of the non-profit organisation Public Health Collaboration Canada and works on the editorial board of the Journal of Insulin Resistance. I've wanted to chat to Megan on the podcast for ages, so it was fabulous to get to spend some time with her. You will hear her mention Terry Lance a fair bit because of the new behavioural program they are collaborating on for the fasting method. It reminds me to tell you that Terry's and my new Monday Mindset podcast is almost ready to launch. I'm just tidying up some pesky admin ends, but it should be beaming out across the podcast webwaves a week on Monday. I'll cross-post the introduction episode here so you'll know when it's coming and what it's all about. I'm really excited about it and hope that you will find it helpful and a great way to start your week. Back now to my chat with Megan. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Welcome, Megan, to the Keto Woman podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you, Daisy. How are you?
I'm good. We were just saying before we started recording, we're at polar opposites. It's boiling hot here, and you were saying it's freezing cold there.
I am very jealous of the warm weather. I'll take it. I'll take it any day. It's so chilly for May right now here in Toronto.
I'd forgotten how warm it can be this time of year, and I haven't grown seeds for a long time, and I've got back into it this year, and I've seen the benefits from it because everything got going really super early and they're all growing really well. I don't think you'd be able to do that where you are.
Not right now, no.
And how are your dogs? I've admired your dogs from afar. We both, well, yours are bigger long dogs than mine. Mine are small ones, but we have similar kind of dogs. How are they doing?
They're doing well. I think that they are enjoying the fact I'm not traveling as much right now. So I think they like having me home. Their dad, my husband, is usually home with them. So he works from home. They get lots of walks, but I think they like having me around now too. They're doing pretty well. They don't like to fast, so they like to interrupt my meetings quite regularly to demand food when I'm trying to talk to people about fasting. But otherwise, they're doing well. They don't mind this weather, actually. They don't like it when it gets too hot outside. So they're enjoying their walks right now, much to my displeasure. I wish it was a bit warmer outside.
You've had them for quite a while now, haven't you? I bet they've really settled in, showing their true characters. I find with dogs that you rehome, it often takes a good 6 months, really, for them to really come into themselves.
They're funny. My female greyhound, we've had her for 2 years now. She was very much herself from the start, very kooky.
Really?
But our male greyhound, we've had him for 3 years, and every day there's something new about his personality, or he warms up to us just a bit more. We actually had him for 2 years before he even attempted to get on furniture and cuddle us.
Wow.
So he's really blossoming. It's been a really cool journey to watch him come out of his shell, and you never know what he's going to do, which is, it's kind of nice. It's like watching a kid grow up.
Yeah, it's lovely. I think that's the real beauty with rehoming dogs, especially a bit older, and especially if they haven't had the best of lives to start with. As they realise they're not getting sent back, they really do come out of their shells, don't they? It's lovely. Well, enough about dogs and the weather. I'm a Brit. I have to do the chit chat first. For those listeners who don't know you, and I'm sure most of them do, but perhaps you could tell them a bit about you and your story.
Yeah, so I'm Megan Ramos. I'm based in the frigid area of Toronto, Canada right now. My background's in clinical research in the area of nephrology, which is the study of kidney disease. But both my personal and professional life sort of changed directions and collided headfirst into one another in my mid-20s. And I somehow accidentally became a therapeutic fasting expert. I went on to co-found the fasting method program with a good friend of mine. His name is Dr. Jason Fung. And we have an online program that helps provide education, resources, and support for individuals looking to incorporate some form of fasting into their lifestyle to lose weight, reverse type 2 diabetes, and improve symptoms of metabolic syndrome. And we also have a team of coaches to help give some personalized advice. So it's been quite a journey over the last several years, Daisy.
It's really taking off big time, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty wild. When we first started fasting patients, it was just in our clinic in Toronto. And we had to beg people to try fasting, and beg them just to skip one meal a day. We got all kinds of negative feedback from other medical leaders in our community. And now fasting is gaining such great global popularity. It's really been quite mind-blowing to watch the transformation and the change in attitude about fasting. And it's been really rewarding just to see the general acceptance of it all.
Yeah, and you're branching out with different programs. I'm sure you know I'm very good friends with Terry Lance, and you've got some really interesting behavioral programs coming out as well.
Yes, we just launched behavioral coaching with Dr. Terry Lance. She has been a good friend of mine for a long time. Fortunately, the time worked out for both of us to collaborate together. She first joined the fasting method as a fasting coach. And then we realized that there was just such a need for help with mindset and help with developing healthy habits from someone who really understood the struggles that most people with metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes are trying to cope with. You know, at the end of the day, there are physiological challenges with fasting. There's trying to figure out what fasting you need to do to alleviate the symptoms of metabolic syndrome and to reverse type 2 diabetes. And there are different physiological challenges along the way with that. But once you get into a rhythm with fasting, you learn what fasting and what nutritional program works for you. You're able to troubleshoot it. Then how do you implement that long term? It's tough in a society where, we're encouraged to eat all of the time, and many of our community members, our families, our work colleagues, our friends just don't understand the concept of fasting. So we collaborated with Terry to develop a behavioral coaching program. So she works one-on-one with individuals who are struggling, figuring out how to develop different strategies and relationships with food, especially when it comes to stress eating, which we're seeing a lot right now, given the current state of the world with the pandemic, and to help develop some sustainable long-term habits and figure out how to deal with these situations when your friends and family are trying to encourage you to eat or are expressing negative feelings about fasting and your dietary choices. And we're going to continue to work with Terry to really evolve this area to develop more resources and more online curriculums to help support these individuals.
It's really where it kicks in, I think, isn't it? When all the newness wears off, I think when you start, it's a lot easier to have the motivation to really go for it. And you get, you go down all the rabbit holes, finding out about the science, finding out all about it. You start seeing the changes in your body and how you're feeling. But it's when everything sort of settles down into the norm, into the maintenance, that it can get a little bit difficult to really keep the mindset in the right place. So I think it's the perfect kind of program to add on to what you do, isn't it?
I definitely believe so. Motivation is not a reliable tool to keep you on track with any healthy habit. Motivation is fleeting. It comes and goes in waves, and it's tough. And in chatting with Terry, I said, I can get anyone with a hemoglobin A1C of 13% down to 5. But how do I keep it there? And how do I prevent it from going back up to 6 or 7? Because what I find is that individuals are really highly motivated when they're that unwell and on that many medications, and they're getting grief from everybody, their friends, their family, their doctors, all to lose weight and to get their diabetes under control. And as soon as you do, the person comes off all of the medication. They're fitting in jeans that they wore back in their university or college days. They're getting all of this positive feedback from everybody. They're from their physicians to their family members. And then old habits start to slide in. They have their first birthday and they've lost weight, and there's maybe it's okay if I have cake, and then they have their first holiday season, and then there's their first vacation, there's their first funeral, there's their first stressful event. And we use food. Food is our best friend. We use food to help celebrate our successes. We use food to help comfort ourselves during periods of stress and sorrow. And it's really tough because we have been brought up to use certain foods for comfort. I come from an Italian family, despite my appearance and my surname. So I grew up, if I had a sad day, my mom would make me spaghetti and meatballs and garlic bread, and I would have chocolate ice cream for dessert. And these things are challenging because when I get sad, those are the types of foods that I would typically gravitate towards. So when people do experience improved health and their family saying, celebrate with this pizza or celebrate with this, there's always an excuse to celebrate, and there's always an excuse to comfort. And if we don't learn different skills and different tools to help us celebrate these successes and help provide us with comfort, we'll be eating all of these foods again all of the time, and the motivation just isn't there. And it's really easy for people to slip into old eating habits, and that A1C can creep up again into the 6s and that pre-diabetic or borderline diabetic range. And this is where I think Terry's role and this whole behavioral program is so critical. And Terry is just excellent at it. And it's just been so amazing to get the feedback from our community members who are collaborating with her. And it's really great to see the results, because it goes to show that change is sustainable. I've I've had the privilege of just knowing Terry and getting all of this advice for free over the
Me
years.
too.
So I'm very grateful for her, and I'm really grateful that we can help bring her knowledge and her support to others.
Absolutely. I feel the same way. I think it's something as well with working towards a goal. I think everyone has a goal. It's quite often a weight loss goal. And even though it can be hard along that way, especially if things slow down, you've got that goal that you're going for. I know I found when I did actually hit the goal that I didn't think I would, but I hit that goal. And I think I managed to sustain that for about a week, maybe 2. And then all the complacency came in and, well, I'm there now, so I can relax everything and go back to quote unquote normal, whatever that means when you've spent years trying to get there. There's something about maintenance. I'm not exactly sure of the word, kind of not exactly boring, but I think everyone who's struggled with their weight for as long as they can remember, like I have, has always been in one of 2 states. They're either losing weight and feeling good about themselves, or they're gaining weight and feeling bad about themselves. But very rarely do you have that maintenance that's just normal. I look at my father, who I think has weighed the same since he was 19, 20. He just hasn't changed at all. He's exactly the same size, exactly the same weight. And that is an absolute anathema to me. But I think it's the maintenance actually when it gets kind of more difficult in a different way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I've so been there myself. Something that Jason Fung always preaches about is, in today's society, eating is the default phase or default mode we're in all of the time. And really fasting needs to be the default mode, but it's such a mental hurdle. And I think for me, I sort of had dumb luck given my position. Here I was, this young individual in a clinic who got a second chance at everything in her life. I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes when I was 27. I'm going to be 36 this year. I had kept going down that path. There's no doubt I would probably be on disability because I would be requiring dialysis and amongst many other health issues. And I get a second chance at fertility, which is something that is important to me because I had such a long-standing history of PCOS. So I was this young woman that got this second chance through fasting and through modifying my diet. And then I got to share that with my patients who are all extremely sick. And every day I got to be either inspired by my patients' success by seeing them come off of medications, or I got that motivation from seeing someone who was resistant to fasting decline in health. I just remember there was a few years ago, I was such a stress eater, but a few years ago we were having one of those nightmare evenings in my family where one cousin was in the hospital across the city from having their heart stop while playing a game of basketball, to a newborn nephew sort of going into liver failure and being airlifted to the hospital for sick children in Toronto. And our family sort of divided and conquered. And it was the middle of the night. I'm at the hospital for sick kids, and without thinking, I went downstairs and I bought a particular tea. I love jasmine green tea. And without thinking, I went and I got this tea. It was an automatic habit. And I had turned this tea into my comfort skill. And I went back up with my tea to the waiting room, and it was like an out-of-body experience. It was such a habit to go, it had become such a habit to go for this tea. And I get back up to the waiting room and I see my family members with their potato chips, with their cheesies, with their pretzels, with their cookies, and just eating all of this junk food. And I realized that I sought out tea to provide me with comfort in that moment. And then I started laughing like a crazy lunatic. And most of my family just thought I was stressed and had lost my mind. But I just couldn't believe it, that this change was actually possible and that I could get there and I could have a different relationship with food and I could use different things to reward and to comfort myself. And I think that's something that's made Terry so successful in her own journey. Every time I see Terry's before photo, it's just so shocking. And I've known her now for so many years, and she's just in such fabulous health. And like all of us, stress does take a toll from time to time, but it's just been truly, truly remarkable. And she's learned so many of these things through her own experience and through collaborating with others like myself and yourself, Daisy. And I'm really happy she's going to be able to help people transition sort of what to do once they do hit that recovery point and how to make this change really sustainable and not have to depend on motivation to keep the results that you achieve with fasting and diet.
Absolutely. Is that one of the things that you found? Because presumably you've been in that maintenance mode for a long time now. I mean, you will have had your period of time where you were striving for that goal. But, you know, once you got to maintenance, how have you held that there? It sounds like being in the environment and the work you do really helps. But it sounds also like you've really worked on building new habits, for example.
It's been a challenge. I wish that I had the resources that we're working on developing now. But back then, I remember I was just having a terrible day. And for me, popcorn was a huge comfort snack food.
Seems to be for a lot of people.
Where I was a total popcorn addict. And I was just having a really bad day. And I thought to myself, you know, my clinic ends today at noon. And I'm going to go walk across the street to the mall and buy my ketchup popcorn. Like, I deserve that today. And my very last patient in the morning came in and he was talking to me about how his son was trying to give him ice cream on the weekend. And he said to his son, "Boy, I've had my fair share of ice cream over the last 78 years of my life. I don't need any more ice cream. I've had more ice cream than the rest of this whole family put together. That's why I'm on these stupid medications and I've got this diabetes. My body's full of plenty of ice cream and now I need to fast to burn it off." So I saw this particular patient and we wrapped up our appointment and I started walking towards the mall and I thought to myself, "Megan, you've had more popcorn than the rest of the city of Toronto has combined. Do you really need any more popcorn?" So I've really had the privilege of these patients always igniting this desire and this motivation in me. And so I've just gotten really lucky. And it forced me to really sort of identify these instances where I would rely on food as a comfort and that would run me into issues and see about alternatives for fixing that. So to be quite frank, life is chaotic right now with the pandemic, and yesterday I was having a bad day and there was certainly a part of me that wanted to go out and order a pizza and have it delivered and just sulk. But I know that doing that is only a few minutes of gratification and I will really regret it and feel unwell later on. So instead I took an Epsom salt bath. I had ordered a new bath pillow. I listened to some fun music while I was in the bathtub. Washed my face because that always makes me feel refreshed and ready to take on the day. And I just started my day over again. And it really took me trying to identify these triggers that I have and trying to find different activities that really provided me with comfort, or different food items like my jasmine green tea, which I find to be so comforting. I look forward to it every morning. And when I'm having a bad day like yesterday, I let myself have a few extra cups of tea just to help, make me feel like I was having a treat. So thanks to my patients and all of the people that I've worked with online, it sort of has forced me into really examining my behaviors. I joked with Terry once. I said, when I was younger, my mom was sick and my parents sent me to counseling because they were worried my mother's health was going to scar me long term. So for several years in my youth, I was in counseling and I found it very eye-opening. I've learned more about myself and my behaviors and my dependency while trying to fast and to maintain my good health results. But it's totally achievable. I'm going on almost 9 years of reversing type 2 diabetes. I've lost 86 pounds and I've kept it off. My weight every year goes up and down 5 pounds, but that's fantastic. Like I'm happy to see this 5-pound fluctuation and maintain that. No fatty liver. I'm more concerned right now about getting pregnant before it's the right time than I am about infertility with my history of PCOS. So I've just been really, really blessed to have gotten to the point where I am now. And I owe that largely to the people that I've worked with over the years.
Which came first, the fasting or change to what you eat? Because I know you made changes to both.
So the fasting came first. I'll never forget my conversation with Jason when he was trying to talk to me about low carb. I grew up in a family where egg yolks were considered to be like drugs, just toxic substances. My mother's father passed away at 41 after open heart surgery. My father's brother died at 36 from his third heart attack. My family were big proponents of the low-fat diet and all of these quote-unquote heart-healthy foods. So it was just so tough. My uncle's death at 36, I was 9, and my uncle was one of my best friends. He was this big, goofy guy I always looked forward to hanging out with at my grandma's. And his death really shook me. And at 9, I was old enough to understand that he had left behind 3 kids who would never know him. So it was really tough to process that. And then, of course, at the time, everyone talked about Kelly and his diet and how it was so poor and how he ate all of that fat. And well, he was eating highly processed and refined fats along with a lot of carbs and had a lot of other unhealthy lifestyle habits. But those weren't things discussed around me when I was a kid. I didn't even know how to cook with fat. I pretty much boiled spaghetti, or I used a George Foreman grill for my boneless, skinless chicken breasts. And that was how I was cooking for myself. So I just found that radically changing my diet when I lacked, first of all, culinary skills. And after I was born in 1984, so several years after the McGovern report came out in the United States, condemning dietary fat and absolving sugar of any wrongdoing. I just didn't have the skills. I grew up with a sick mom. Fast food, Chinese food, pizza, McDonald's, those were the foods that those were our meals. So it was really tough, and I sort of surrendered at first. And I said, okay, if I can't radically change what I eat, and I felt so unwell at the time that it just seemed like this impossible overhaul, let me try to change when I ate. And it was definitely tough. It would have been a lot easier, I think, to fast if I had a better diet, but I needed to do something. And fasting gave me the ability to feel better, to think clearer, to have more energy, and to start making these changes to my diet. My diet's been a real evolution over the last decade, but I'm really proud of where I'm at today. And it didn't take too long to get there either. Within 6 months of fasting, I was eating a very low carbohydrate diet. 6 months later, I was on a well-structured ketogenic diet and felt fantastic. And at that point, I believed I was fully fat adapted, and it definitely made transitioning from eating to fasting much easier. But the diet came later on for me.
And I know you don't really push too heavily a particular diet with the people you work for, but it does seem to me that keto, certainly low carb, and fasting really do partner very well together. A lot of people I know have just kind of fallen naturally into fasting because of the way they eat, just because their appetite drops and they find it easier. Yes, there are some people who have tried the fasting first, especially there's been a lot of popularity with some of the IF plans, like, the 5-2 type plan and things like that. I can remember watching programs on television. Ironically, actually, they don't really fast on the fasting days, but eat fairly low calorie. But, the kind of principles there that people are fairly familiar with it. But it does just seem to be something that people naturally fall into in this community. Do you find that most people, I'm sure you probably encourage most people to follow this path if you can, just like Jason did with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the marriage of fasting and a low carb or ketogenic diet for someone with metabolic syndrome is critically important. We try in our program not to preach about any particular diet because we want to make fasting as accessible to everybody. What we do spend a lot of time educating on is the importance of real food. But I find that with a lot of people that do come into our program, they, as you've said, Daisy, like they've tried the low carb, they've tried ketogenic, and they've naturally sort of have fallen into this time restricted eating pattern. And they realize that, hey, fasting isn't so problematic after all. Not if I'm feeding my body the right foods that it needs to help me start to burn body fat. So why don't I learn a little bit more about this fasting to see if I can do it in perhaps a more efficient or a more well-structured way. So I definitely think even in my own experience, if I could have wrestled up the energy to try to work on my diet, being in a state of ketosis through nutrition would have definitely helped with the fast. And we see some people, I've worked with some people that getting into fasting is just too troublesome unless we get them into a state of ketosis with their diet first. So I think that especially for people with metabolic syndrome, the combination of fasting and low carb or ketogenics is very important for recovery. And we encourage people, to think of fasting and think of nutrition as your medical therapies that you're doing for metabolic syndrome. You don't want to drag it out forever. You don't want to, go up and down in terms of your blood sugar levels. I made a commitment to myself to absolve my type 2 diabetes in 6 months. So I planned on fasting 3 days of the week, regardless of what pattern, but I needed to show up for my fasting days like they were therapeutic treatments. And I had to start looking at my food like it was medicine rather than something to make me feel like I just ate something yummy or to provide me with comfort in order to get there. And we spend a lot of time trying to educate people on that so they can start to incorporate it and make therapeutic change. And a lot of the time too, people think that ketogenic diets are just really tough, even though they've heard that they work well. But if they start fasting and getting into a state of ketosis more, this is what happened to me, was that I love the feeling. So I started to modify my diet on my eating days. And that's what inspired me to really change my diet and cut back on the carbs and start to embrace healthy, natural fats.
Oh, that's interesting. So they start working off each other. I was going to ask you, something I hear a lot is that the ketogenic diet is described as a fasting mimicking diet. So if you're already in this fasting mimicking state, what's the need to go that extra mile and fast as well?
I hear that too, and I disagree with that. Many people have come to us and they think that they're broken. With the gaining popularity of the ketogenic diet over the last few years, I think Diet Doctor, popular low carb site, is one of the top nutritional searches on Google. It's gained tremendous amount of popularity. So many people are coming to us now already having tried it, and they've had success. I'm not going to try to shun the diet. It's a diet that I follow personally, but they lose 50 of that 80 pounds. They bring their A1C down to 5.6 or 5.8, but they can't bring it to 4.6 or 4.8. They can't just get that last little bit of their goal. It seems unattainable. And they come for a consultation with myself or someone like Terry or anyone else on our team, and they say, are we just really broken? But when we review their diet, there's literally no room for improvement. Great foods, but it's just the pattern of their eating. And people need to understand that insulin resistance, so the cause of metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes, is caused by two factors. So first, it's the presence of high insulin in the body, which is generated when we do eat a diet that's very high in carbohydrates. So when you switch to a low carb or a ketogenic diet, you're not adding more insulin to your system. But what else causes insulin resistance is frequent productions of insulin, even at very small volumes. So this is where meal timing plays a big role. And I think the marriage of the two is really key for therapeutic reversal of metabolic syndrome. So if you have this condition called insulin resistance, and it's caused by insulin being produced in too high quantities and insulin being produced too often, you need to marry the two together in order to recover. And at first, I was really hopeful too. Okay, I don't have to fast anymore. I reached my goals. I can eat all of these healthy foods, but I can eat them whenever I want now. And the weight started to creep back up. And I didn't understand. I'm eating macadamia nuts. I'm eating like the most organic bacon and grass-fed steaks and duck eggs. But the weight creeps up. So these individuals who come to us on these great ketogenic diets, we just start implementing time-restricted eating and some intermittent fasting. And sure enough, in a few months, their A1C is 4.6. They've lost that last 30 pounds. So I think that both things are needed. We need to do the fasting to break the cycle of insulin resistance. If there's insulin resistance in the body, even in the absence of adding more insulin to the body through a low-carb diet, insulin resistance itself still drives up insulin levels. And it's really the fasting that helps break the cycle of that. And that's what we've seen in our clinical experience too.
Yes, it makes sense to me. And it's not only what I've seen with my own experience, but I see a lot of people struggling with the same thing. Like you say, there's nothing wrong with the foods they're eating. It's just potentially how much, how often that is still creating a few problems. And it is frustrating when you've got a long way there and can't seem to just nudge past those final few goalposts. So no, that's really interesting because like you said, like I've said, we've both seen this phrase thrown around. And I suppose for some people it is enough. There are all these different stages, aren't they, depending on the individual. For some people, moderate carb is perfectly fine. For some people, it needs to be low carb. For some people, it needs to be keto. For some people, it needs to be carnivore. And it really depends. Although I would imagine that you'd argue that some kind of fasting regime is beneficial for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Fasting doesn't have to be that excessive. No. It's one of the reasons why we wrote our most recent book, Life in the Fasting Lane, with Eve. So Dr. Fung and I wrote a book with our good friend Eve Mayer. She's a funny lady from Dallas, Texas, who emailed us and told us we made her super sexy and she needed to come to Toronto and show us just how sexy she has become through fasting. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to highlight Eve's story because she had some metabolic syndrome. Sure, she wasn't type 2 diabetic. Her insulin resistance wasn't severe by any means. There were some mild issues with PCOS. And she didn't do anything crazy with fasting. She just was mindful of when she ate. She was mindful of cutting out those snacks, going back to the basics, eating those 3 meals a day. Her diets, she publicly talks about it being sort of a work in progress, trying to adhere to more real foods. But she's had incredible results. And Eve's an extremely successful person. Forbes magazine in the United States named her one of the top 10 females in digital marketing. She's gone on to create many successful companies, but she could never lose weight. And she's actually had 3 different bariatric surgeries to try to lose weight unsuccessfully. She spent hundreds of thousands of dollars going to different food addiction centers and different weight loss programs. And then she found fasting, and it didn't take that much to change her diet. So some individuals, minor changes, just going back to how my grandmother ate growing up. My grandmother was the only person who didn't think I was a lunatic when I first started fasting. She said, Megan, I didn't go to school with a pail of snacks to eat at my recess break or to eat during class. And when I came home from school, I wasn't allowed to snack. I had to save my appetite for dinner. And if I was hungry after dinner, that meant I sure as heck didn't eat enough broccoli off my plate or enough chicken. So I needed to eat more and be mindful of when I was feeling full. And my grandmother said to me, I didn't start gaining weight till we started keeping cookies in the house and potato chips in the house. And I would start not having them just on special occasions, but just because it was Tuesday night and I was watching my television program. So just going back to these basics like Eve did, cutting out the snacks, trying to go back to eating meals, occasionally cutting out a meal here and there, you can get great results. And sometimes that works very well for individuals. And sometimes people have pretty advanced metabolic syndrome like I did, even at a young age, and need to do more therapeutic levels of fasting and be more strict with their diet in order to get results. So there's a whole spectrum, but what we've seen and what my dialysis patients have taught me is with our dialysis patients, we can't fast them for long periods of time. So individuals on dialysis that have a tremendous amount of insulin resistance, we will try to fast them for 24 hours, 3 times a week. And at first, their motivation was high because they were promised the solution and they had seen other patients do well. And they were really mindful of all of the education we provided them about meal timing and not snacking. And at first, the first month, they'd all lose tremendous amounts of weight and reduce their medication. But then in the second month, they weren't getting any results. And I asked them to start keeping food diaries, and their foods were excellent, but they were no longer sticking to those meals. And we talked about them establishing meals or eating windows when they would eat on their eating days so they wouldn't be snacking or grazing. And I had everybody follow up with me in another month's time. Well, the least amount of weight lost in that group was 7 pounds. Mind you, the weight can vary in dialysis patients, but it was still pretty impressive. And the dialysis patients have really taught me the importance of not snacking. So today, regardless of where you are in your metabolic health journey, if you're young and healthy and listening to this podcast because you want to maintain your good health and do some biohacking, or if you're struggling with long-term insulin resistance, I think the first step is to really cut out snacks. And I think we can all see major improvement in our metabolic health if we just stop snacking and went back to the basics, whether it's eating 2 or 3 meals a day.
It's just completely the norm now, isn't it? I mean, I'm old enough to remember pre-snacking. It really started coming in when I was quite young. I can remember it really starting at school when I was about 6, 7. But I can remember what it was like before. And it did take a while actually for snacks to start coming into my home. I saw it more with other kids being met at the gate with sweets and things like that, but it wasn't so much like that for me. But yeah, I certainly remember a time before snacks and I survived. It is possible, and it's a good thing to be hungry. It's a good thing to be hungry for your next meal. That's actually what's supposed to happen, isn't it? I think people fear sometimes this feeling hungry and that their children might be hungry for another hour or 2 before they can eat, but actually there's not really a problem with that.
No, it's really bizarre. A year ago, we moved into our house and we moved into an area of Toronto called Etobicoke, and it's sort of going through the gentrification. And I love this area. It's where both my parents grew up. I literally lived down the street from my grandmother's old house where I'd spend every Sunday as a kid. And I love this area. And so I was so excited to see it being revitalized. And it was already a very safe area, but it was getting revamped. It was becoming more modern. So my husband and I decided to put down some roots here. But I live in the north end, and gentrification's moving north. So most of it's happened in the south. And one day I was just having a terrible, terrible day. And I thought, oh gosh, I'm going to treat myself. And I started driving around my neighborhood looking for something that I would have used to treat myself. And I couldn't find anything. And so I drove home and I parked, and then Jason and Fung called me about something. And I just started giggling. I said, you know what? If anyone ever second guesses or has any doubts about how our grandparents ate growing up, they need to come to my neighborhood because my neighborhood's completely constructed around communities. homes, playgrounds, libraries, churches, schools. And that's it. Like there's no fast food restaurants. There's no convenience stores. There's nothing. And I live in probably what is one of the older areas or last few older areas to be revitalized. And I said, it just wasn't possible. Like I have no doubt that my grandmother and my grandfather like ate most of their meals at home and there are no restaurants. Like you have to drive to the south end or outside of our area of Etobicoke. People ate at home. It's just been really crazy, especially for me, because I grew up in the era of snacks. And for me, it was really hard to try to imagine a life without having snacks in them. But this is really how we ate for most of human history, not eating every 5 seconds of the day.
Yes, I must admit from what you describe, it sounds maybe not all of France, but certainly where I am, which is more rural. Yes, we have the basics. We have the supermarkets. We do have some restaurants, but we don't have all these sort of snacky places. They don't really go in too much for takeaways. There is a pizza place and there might be a kebab place somewhere, but they're really not this, where my mother lives in Worthing on the south coast in the UK. Well, the row of shops near her, I think there are at least 4 fast food places there, just in that tiny little neighbourhood. And it's very different here. Opening hours are very much restricted. Sunday, everything's closed. And it does help, doesn't it? It does help if the availability is lowered. It does kind of help just put that obstacle between you and things that maybe aren't very good for you.
I was just, I've developed some pretty good skills, but every now and then I'm still human. And I was just having this terrible day. And then I just went out to discover my community, and I'm searching on my Google Maps in my car and like the closest this fast food or that, like I'd have to drive way out of my way to get it. And it just made me laugh and say, okay, Megan, go inside, wash your face, take a bath, have some tea. Do what you're supposed to do. And, we hear parents ask us all of the time, sort of about kids. Like, is it really okay for them to go like between meals without eating? But thinking back to how my grandparents grew up, and even my parents, my grandmother picked on my father and said, he was never overweight until he moved out to go to law school. But we didn't keep chips and stuff around. I didn't send him to school with anything. Maybe if he was lucky, he got an apple, and that was a really wild and special treat. And she said we only had things like potato chips on holidays like Canada Day weekend or Thanksgiving. They just weren't things that we had in the house all of the time.
So tell us a little bit more about Life in the Fasting Lane, the book. It sounds very interesting. So the framework is Eve's story, is that right? And then you get across a lot of useful information in the process.
Yeah, so people ask us, Jason Fung, he's written several books now, and they're all very sort of science-dense books, and none of them really tackle sort of the emotional struggles that people go through. And Eve was very vulnerable in sharing her story with Jason and I, and then in the book, just about all of these things, when she hit a plateau, how broken she felt and how depressed she got because she was just so used to failing at weight loss. And she wasn't, giving herself any credit to what she was doing actually being a successful intervention. And just the emotional struggles, how struggling with her weight really hurt her self-confidence, how it affected her outlook on life. And most of the things that she was so willing to publicly share with all of the people that we work with at the Fasting Method, these are things that we know that people are experiencing, but they're feeling so alone and that no one understands. or that maybe it's just them. So they're afraid to speak up and have a voice and to say, what they're struggling with, or just this chronic fear of failure that we see if somebody has a plateau for a week or two due to stress. Stress is running really high right now, given the COVID situation. And that has a huge impact, but most people blame themselves if they don't see any movement on their scale or they see their blood sugar levels go up a bit. It's a personality flaw. It's a personality characteristic. So what they do is they blame themselves, and we wanted to bring Eve's story to light. We wanted to have people have that best friend who understands their journey. And through it, Dr. Fung breaks down the science in a way that's more digestible for people than his other books like the Obesity Code or the Diabetes Code, for example. And I break down some more of the practical applications and how Eve's not the only one. There's so many people, men and women, that I've worked with over the years that have struggled with this as well and that are feeling this way, and that they're not alone. And these are the strategies that works. These are the mindset tips and the fasting tips and eating behaviors that have worked with the thousands of people that we've seen in the fasting method, and the same ones that worked for Eve.
That seems to fall in really well with the direction you seem to be taking with IDM, with the new behavioral modules.
I think Eve's story and this book is sort of a nice framework for letting people know that there's nothing wrong with them. We've been taught to eat in a certain way. We've been told to eat certain foods. And now there's this whole emotional side connected to our previous eating habits. And that's something that's very real, and that people should not be ashamed or embarrassed about it, that so many people struggle with these issues too. And now we're trying to provide the fasting method more tools to help support those individuals. But I want Eve's story, what I think is so great about it and the timing of it is that it's not our fault. And you're not broken, and we can fix it, and you can make sustainable change. It's okay to feel like Eve did, because, hey, this is how we were taught to do things, but you're not broken. And to try to recognize that, maybe I do have food dependency issues. Maybe I do use food as stress coping, and identify these issues and not necessarily blame yourself. And then what we're doing with Terry, we're helping to teach people how to overcome these things and develop healthier habits. I really look forward to eating when it's time to eat, because I know it makes me feel good after I eat the right things. And I know that when I have a bad day, that most of the time, 90% of the time, I can get tremendous gratification through a bath or washing my face or going for a walk or playing with my dogs. And 10% of the time I still struggle with older habits, but it's been really great to see this evolution. And I've seen it with other people, and I'm really hoping that what we do with Terry can help people realize that it's not their fault and develop healthy behaviors to overcome these habits that we had that have led us down the wrong path.
And do you see a difference between how men and women do? It's probably because I'm surrounded more by women in my Facebook group and things, but it does seem to be, from the way they talk, that they often, if they happen to have husbands who are following similar plans, their husbands always seem to find it a lot easier than they do. Is that a trend that you see?
Yeah, absolutely. When more people are on board at home, it definitely makes it a lot easier. I find women tend to, if they can get through it with their partners at first, and their partners see the weight loss and see the health improvements, they usually jump on the bandwagon, and then everything becomes a lot easier at home. I see men, though, struggle a little bit more if their wives are not on board at home. And generally in that population, the wives tend to be the cooks at home, and they'll prepare the meals. They want to eat themselves, and they don't want to prepare a meal for just one person, because that's a lot of work. So they tend to get a little bit more frustrated. But with women, they definitely do much better when there's support at home. I find in sort of older population of clients that we work with, weight loss does come easier for men. But when it comes to metabolic syndrome and reversing type 2 diabetes, it can be just as challenging for men as it is for women. And what we're seeing with younger men in their 20s, 30s, 40s is that there's a lot of thyroid issues as well. There's a lot more hormonal complications in this population of men, and they're struggling just as much as the females in their own age group. Not all of the time. You still get that younger guy that's relatively healthy that just put on his freshman 15 and is still trying to drop it, or that new dad that, put on 10 or 15 pounds after their baby was born and had several months of sleepless nights, and they lose that weight quickly. But for someone like my own brother, for example, he grew up very much eating the same way that I did, and the same foods, and developed this. We learned our relationship with food from our parents. My dad was a trial lawyer. Daddy comes home, he's angry, he's grumpy. Mom gives him spaghetti, chocolate cake, chocolate milk, and a bag of potato chips. Daddy's happy. Those foods make it better. So for someone who grew up like I did, my brother has a lot of metabolic issues that he's working on. And for him, his struggle is just as complicated as mine was at the same age.
Oh, that's very interesting that you see that increase with thyroid issues. Again, I don't know if it's correct or not, but I always think of that as being a bit more of a female than a male issue.
Yeah, most doctors, even one of my very best friends, I was chatting with him a few months ago, and he sounds very symptomatic of hypothyroidism. And again, he grew up eating the same way I did, with the same sort of principles around food and emotional support. And he went to his doctor to see if he could get a thyroid panel done. And his doctor said, "What, are you kidding me? Men don't get thyroid issues. I'm not going to run blood tests that aren't necessary on you." And so they wouldn't even test him for it simply because he was a man. Mm-hmm. But if he was a 35-year-old female, they'd absolutely test him for it if she reported those symptoms. So there's some unique discrimination, I think, that goes on, unfortunately, these days. And I think in the younger generations, the millennials were seeing these complications happen in men just due to the fact I was born in an era that breastfeeding wasn't necessarily a popular thing amongst women, and cornstarch, baby pablum and formula, and the McDonald's era of children and fast food and Happy Meals. And so I think that men are becoming more prone to developing these issues because of the history of their diet.
That's very interesting. Just all sorts of things that you don't necessarily think about that are changing. And have you seen, I imagine, people seem to be armed with a lot more knowledge and information. Have you found that your clientele knows a lot more as they're coming in now?
Absolutely. People are definitely being the advocates of their own health, which is great to see. No one should ever fast blindly because they heard that Megan Ramos knows something about fasting and that it might be good for their health. They should do their research. I encourage people to challenge me and to try to get me to convince them through science as to why they should try certain strategies in life. And I think that people are just so sick and tired of the status quo with traditional medicine. You have a symptom, you go to the doctor, here's a prescription that treats the symptom, and then the condition grows. The root cause of those symptoms expands. Here's more prescriptions, and people are just sick and tired of that. So they're utilizing the internet and social media and online groups like ours to help expand their knowledge and make informed decisions about their own health, because they're realizing that perhaps, maybe their doctor isn't up to date with current literature in certain areas, or this isn't their particular area of expertise. So there are a lot of people out there coming at us with a lot of knowledge, and it's really great to see because the way our current healthcare education system is set up for healthcare providers is not necessarily in the favor of treating the root causes of condition or using lifestyle interventions that may help. It's more pharmaceutical-based healthcare. So it's great to see people want to be so informed about their health and making decisions based on sound science that they're comfortable with.
What would you say are the most common problems that people are coming to you with?
Most commonly, we see a lot of women with subclinical hypothyroidism, and they're struggling with weight loss, especially perimenopausal, menopausal, and postmenopausal. And we're finding that the hypothyroidism is just sort of a big roadblock for them. So working with their diet, with fasting and with their healthcare providers to try to get them to a place where they can lose weight. And usually once they do, the hypothyroidism resolves itself, which is really awesome to see. So we have a lot of women struggling with weight loss in these various stages of life. A lot of younger women come to us with polycystic ovarian syndrome. They're either looking to improve their symptoms of PCOS, or they're looking to become pregnant and increase their fertility, and weight loss and tackling the symptoms of PCOS is important, and fasting can do that. So we have a lot of those individuals, a tremendous amount of diabetics who come to us, and people with other metabolic conditions such as, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, sleep apnea. With blood pressure and sleep apnea, we've been quite successful with a lot of people. With cholesterol, there's a lot of re-education that goes on to teaching people about that exactly and what numbers they should be looking at. We have a lot of individuals trying to conquer the different aspects of metabolic syndrome. Jason does have a book coming out later this year called The Cancer Code. So we're seeing more and more people with metabolic cancers trying to clean up their diet and incorporate fasting to see if that helps.
Fantastic. I look forward to that. Yes, so all sorts of things. If that's someone out there listening, just tell them where they can find you, where they can find that help.
Thank you, Daisy. So everyone can find us on our website. We're thefastingmethod.com. So you can search there. Links to all of our social profiles are there. If you're hesitant about starting to fast and you're looking just for some information, we have a great blog that's updated every other week. And we have a YouTube channel where we try to share some of the basics about the benefits of fasting and some ways to start experimenting with fasting on your own to see if it's something you'd like to invest more in learning about and incorporating into your health and your lifestyle.
And then there are different levels you can go to if you want a bit more help, can't you? You can join the group membership, or you can go on to have one-on-one and now also have this behavioral coaching as well.
Yes. Yeah, we have our program, which has a course on fasting and eating created by Jason Fung and myself, resources like your frequently asked question videos, handouts and guides. We have interactive support sessions run by our fasting coaches on various topics, from fasting for beginners to women in fasting to health optimization. We do live and interactive Q&A sessions with myself, Dr. Jason Fung, and cardiologist Dr. Nadir Ali. And we also we have group fasting challenges every week and a great forum for support. So that's something that people can sign up for on a monthly basis or an annual basis. And then we offer fasting coaching and we offer behavioral coaching depending on the individual's needs. Our fasting coaching program is really for people looking to figure out how to start implementing fasting into their lifestyle to lose weight, improve symptoms of metabolic syndrome, and reverse type 2 diabetes. So there we focus a lot on re-education about eating and nutrition and dietary strategies. And we start the implementation of fasting and troubleshooting the physiological side effects. What Terry's doing with the behavioral coaching program is really for those individuals that have mastered the physiological side of fasting, but they're trying to tackle the behavioral issues, handling Christmas, handling Easter and Thanksgiving, vacations, stress eating, different habits,
global
different
pandemics.
triggers. Global pandemics. Terry is very busy with that right now. So Terry really teaches people how to troubleshoot, develop healthy habits, address mindset issues, and maintain their great results.
Fantastic. Well, you've shared lots of great information and lots of tips already, but maybe you could leave us with a top tip.
So if you're brand new to fasting, I really encourage you, not to sound like a broken record, but if you're brand new to fasting, you're scared to fast, try to cut out snacking. Now, this doesn't mean giving up things like nuts or cheese, for example, but if you want to eat those items, eat them at your meals. So if you want to have macadamia nuts, if you want to have that cheese, if you want to have that avocado or those berries, whatever diet you follow, don't say that you can't have them at all. Just start moving them into your meals. And I bet you'll be really surprised after doing that for 1 month, how much looser your pants are feeling and how much better your blood glucose levels are going or are doing. So try not to think of it necessarily as having to give up a bunch of stuff, but just think of it as moving these treats to your eating windows. So you don't have to give up nuts and give up cheese and these other items that you like. Just eat them when you eat your meal, and it will make a really big difference without having to sacrifice them altogether in your diet.
Yes, that's a very good point. And it's very typical here in France to finish off your meal with some cheese. I love cheese, and I have to admit it is one of those things that is very tempting to reach to for snacks. And I've started doing exactly what you're saying, is having that cheese, but having it as my dessert effectively. And it's a much better approach, isn't it?
You still have it, so you're not missing it.
Absolutely. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for sharing some of your valuable time. I know how busy you are, Megan. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks for having me on, Daisy.
To get the resources and links from this show, please go to ketowomanpodcast.com/episodes. Please share this podcast with as many people as possible by sharing one of my links or just taking a screenshot of an episode that you enjoyed. Reviews really help raise the profile of the podcast, which gets it in front of more people, but also helps me attract a wide variety of guests. So please take a minute to leave a review on whichever podcast app or platform you like to listen on. It doesn't go unnoticed by me, the people who regularly like, share and comment on my posts. Your support really does mean the world to me. Thank you. Are you enjoying this podcast? Help me make more episodes and videos by making a pledge at my Patreon page, patreon.com/KetoWoman, or simply hit the support button on the Keto Woman podcast website. Don't forget to join in the fun on the Keto Woman podcast Instagram and Facebook pages, and Daisy_Keto Woman on Twitter. Are you my next extraordinary woman? Maybe you've got an idea for a show, a topic you would like to hear about. Let me know how I can tickle your earbuds by dropping me a line at daisy@ketowomanpodcast.com. This week's end quote is from S.C. Lowry. Not all positive change feels positive in the moment. Bye-bye, Keto Lovelies.